As you wander outside the city limits of Albuquerque, gaze across the mesa, walk the bosque, or hike the foothills, you're actually looking at a natural xeriscape, consisting of an unusual variety of plants which have adapted to the arid environment. Albuquerque is located on the edge of the Chihuahuan and Sonoran deserts, a vast, sweeping landscape. The modern development of the city began around the turn of the century, but its heaviest growth has occurred in just the last 30 years. Most of the folks who live here now came from somewhere else, and many of us decided to replant the yards we left behind right here in the desert Southwest, with landscapes that belong in Ohio or Virginia. As long as water was plentiful and cheap, we had no worries. We planted thousands of acres of grass that grows in Kentucky, deciduous trees, shrubs, and flowers. We transformed the desert. We brought plants from other parts of the world that can't live in the desert without lots and lots of water. Some of us just plain forgot where we live.
Hello, Jackie. I'm Curtis Smith with the Xeriscape Council. We're here to completely change out your landscape to a xeriscape. You've got a nice traditional landscape here.
Jackie Gould's home on Albuquerque's west side is typical of high water use yards. Her water bill last summer was almost out of sight. It started her thinking about landscaping alternatives.
Yellow here. You said that there's a yucca that died here last year.
Yeah, one died, and then this one I think is following it to the grave.
It has the agave weevil. Part of the problem is that it's here in a bluegrass lawn area and it's just getting too much water. So we'll probably be removing this yucca. Well, looking at this bluegrass, it's in pretty good shape. Probably you're irrigating over the minimum 40 inches that it needs here in an area that gets 8 to 10 inches of rainfall a year.
I have to water it quite a bit, especially like in July and August when it gets warm. I probably water twice a day for 20 minutes at a time, and my water bill is probably over $100. So anything I could do to reduce my water bill would be a great help, and I think that by taking the grass out, that would be a great start.
Changing to a xeriscape ought to reduce your water use considerably. And Jackie, I'd like to introduce you to Judith Phillips. She knows more about the native plants here than anyone else I know.
Judith Phillips is a leading expert on xeriscape gardening. She has written extensively on southwestern landscaping with native plants.
If you have well-drained soil and plenty of sunlight, what kind of plants do you like?
Well, I like flowering plants that are blue, red, and white more than the yellow and the orange ones. And I like multi-branch trees. If they're flowering, that's even better. I don't really care for any cactus. They just aren't inviting for me, and I have that problem with that yucca over there that just kind of giving me a bad taste for cactus.
Sure. Well, and so many of the flowering plants are so soft and really inviting. And why don't we walk through and see what we can do here? Somewhere up in this area might be a good place for desert willow. It'd bring hummingbirds up close to the windows where you could see them, and maybe some color along the pathway where you come up to the front door. Mm-hmm. Giant 4 o'clock, several of the penstemons would work really well. There are just so many options. Threadleaf sage, Apache plume down in this area maybe. Do you want any lawn?
No, I don't really care if I have any grass. I'm not attached to any of this. If it all went and new stuff came in, that would be fine.
Native and climate-adapted plants develop a root system first in order to deal with the pressures of the climate here, and so the plants are going to be small going in. It won't look like a finished landscape when it's first done. That takes a few years to develop and really fill in the potential.
Are my watering habits going to stay the same?
No, they will be more frequent and less water for each watering to begin with, and then as the plants develop in the landscape, you'll water less often and more deeply. That will depend on the choice of the plants that's made overall, and that's something that we need to talk about in terms of the final design.
One of the principles of Xeriscape is planning and design. It's important to do the job right in the planning and design phase. So I'd like to introduce you to George Radnovich. He is a professional landscape architect here in Albuquerque.
George will help Jackie visualize the yard's design and will recommend plant varieties for her new Xeriscape.
I don't really care if we keep any of this, and I'm open to suggestions.
You're making me very happy. I'd like to see the grass reduced at the very least, and hopefully a lot of it removed, and maybe removed totally. There's so much of it here, and another aspect of the grass that's here to consider is the fact that it slopes down towards the front sidewalk, and what's happening every time you water this grass is the runoff is going off of the grass and out into the street, and we're sending it down to the folks in Texas and Mexico. There are lots of alternatives that we can explore while we design this project, and we'll work together on that. One is another type of turf grass. Something like buffalo grass or grama grass can be used for a substitute lawn. But buffalo grass, really you're only watering once it's established, very infrequently, once a week to once every 10 days. Other alternatives could be ground covers, or a mix of different types of shrubs and ground covers to present a pleasing picture for the landscape. You know, maybe we should consider that this flat area up here is an area that's close to your front door. If you want a little bit higher water use for the plants up there, plants that might require just a little bit more care, up near the house is the place to put it. Whereas away from the front door, out where your little graveled berm is right now, it could be the lowest water use portion of the landscape, because part of what we're going to be doing is hydrozoning the landscape. And hydrozoning the landscape means that we will zone it so that there are portions of it that will use a little bit higher water than others. And we want to plan those pieces so that they're closest to you and your needs. Something that I've done on quite a few landscapes is use herbs as an example, which many of them are very xeric plants, near the door so that you can come out and harvest those herbs for cooking. This pinon is a plant that I think we can retain and save and reutilize in the landscape because it's a native, it's drought tolerant, it looks like it's in great condition, it's very healthy, it's got a lot of growth candles on it. On the other hand, this yucca could be a real problem for you in the long run, and I think we should remove it. Those plants aren't really native to this part of the world. They're native to Texas and the Big Bend area of Texas, and they're susceptible to a lot of diseases in Albuquerque because of it. Other choices that are native to the New Mexico climate are soap tree yucca, Yucca elata, and that one is our state flower, and it grows the same size. It's a much more adapted plant. Another thing I wanted to mention to you is gravel. This has always been one of my pet peeves. In Albuquerque, landscapers like to use gravel as a landscape element rather than as a mulch. We should be using gravel here to mulch under plants as opposed to making it a part of an element of the landscape. These two plants that are in the parkway strip of your landscape right now are probably inappropriate to a xeric landscape. This juniper, although it's a very xeric plant, they're very tough plants. They produce a lot of pollen, which is a real problem. You can see from just hitting it that there's a lot of pollen dust in it. Purple plums, although the flowers are pretty, there are other plants that are lower water use that can be used for a xeriscape and provide the same function. Another plant I think we should be considering removing is the photinia, which lines the front of your bed here. One of the things that the original designer did, which really doesn't make sense to me, is they put the photinia in front of your windows. That plant grows about 10 to 12 feet high, and I bet it's a constant chore for you to cut that back.
Oh, it's real hard to keep small and then constantly dying out and turning yellow.
They're even greener and bigger in the Orient, which is where they're from, which is why we shouldn't be using them here. I think the next step in the process is to actually do the design work. Bob, Margaret, I think the trees should probably, if possible, and maybe the shrubs, be put on one zone, and then the perennials on another.
The final plan review for Jackie's Xeriscape is a good opportunity to coordinate irrigation design with Bob England of Aspen Landscaping, as well as grading and planting issues with Margaret Olivares of Alternative Landscape.
Weekly, everything else will eventually be watered monthly throughout the year.
So we can retrofit right
Easy.
from the existing irrigation system. The grades are only changing up in here and this way, and there needs to be a positive drainage in that direction because we don't want water sitting up next to the house when it comes off the roof also. But I think just looking at the lay of the land, it should drain that way. pretty easily.
You've developed a great water harvesting setup right there too.
Yeah, I thought just taking the drainage right off the roof would be really helpful, and that's the only place that it drains to the front yard. So in the swale itself, the gravel dry stream bed here, I have a combination of Mexican threadgrass and dwarf butterfly bush, which is a gray flowering plant that blooms a kind of a violet bluish color here. So that's what's in there, and they are water drought tolerant kinds of plants, but they like that little bit of extra water, and that's why we put them around the swale like that. Also at the base of the piñons here and here, I use giant 4 o'clock, which is also a native actually of the piñon juniper level. As ground cover underneath the desert willow and kind of in between them, I used a combination of purple ice plant here and English lavender there, which is not native but is very drought tolerant and it's a moderate water user, and then autumn joy sedum here up next to the windows. Then along the edge of the swale, I used pine leaf penstemon, which is a red blooming penstemon that's evergreen. Looks kind of like a little dwarf pine. Over on the other side of the driveway here, woods rose, which is a thicket forming rose, native rose, has pink flowers, and it will fill in that whole bed there.
Okay. And then for ground cover, you use the
same, either bark mulch or Santa Fe brown gravel. And then in the parkway strip, along the edge, we had that swale kind of spill out onto that area here. A little bit of the red yucca also kind of spills out into that area. So this plant is shown at about 4 or 5 feet across, and that plant, when it's put in, won't be that big. It'll have to grow out and cover that space.
When I tell people I'm getting my lawn xeriscape, they think of just tearing out what you have and putting in rocks. And when I explain to them you have to have an irrigation system and plants, that I don't think they understand that. They just, because they're so used to seeing so many yards with just rock.
This kind of a landscape will save you a lot of water and a lot of money in the long run, and it should maintain itself to a large degree after it's put in. There shouldn't be a huge amount of maintenance involved in this landscape. They're mostly natives, and the ones that aren't native, that are exotic, are very drought-tolerant exotics from other parts of the world where climates are very similar to ours.